They say no man is perfect, but Alexander the Great came pretty close, if you ignore his habit of naming every city after himself. Now anyone who starts learning history has to go through the ritual of picking his favorite conqueror from the big three. No, not your childhood shonen animes, but Napoleon, Julius Caesar, or Alexander the Great. If you picked none, you are probably Mongol. Now if it's not already obvious from the title and thumbnail, my pick is Alexander the Great. Yes, even though I'm Persian and we all know how much Alexander enjoyed making Persia his personal punching bag, credit has to be given where it's due. So without wasting any more time, let's see why he was the greatest. Well, firstly, he never lost a battle, whilst conquering an empire that spanned 3 continents. Meanwhile, I struggled to conquer the snooze button before 7 am. Alexander the Great won every encounter he had. He would show up, size up the battlefield, and turn even the worst odds into a sure win. Take the Battle of Gaugamela, where his Macedonian army, heavily outnumbered, faced the vast Persian forces of Darius III. Now, although the 2 previous Dariuses were quite the experts at beating the Greeks, Darius III simply didn't have the genes, or maybe Alex was too good. Long story short, Alexander sliced through the Persian lines with surgical precision, turning chaos into his personal playground. In other words, he ended the Achaemenid Empire and didn't even break a sweat. Now we could go on and on to talk about Alexander's tactical genius in every battle, but honestly, the sheer size of his empire and the fact that he never lost a fight pretty much do all the talking for him. Speaking of size brings us to the next point that makes Alexander better than any other guy with ambition. His real estate was bigger. To be exact, his empire stretched from Greece to Egypt all the way to India. To put that in perspective, his conquest covered about 2 million square miles. That's roughly 150 times the size of modern Greece and the size of the Roman Empire at its peak, conquered in just 13 years. Get that, Caesar fans. For context, most of us can't even commit to finishing a Netflix series in that time. Basically, in just over a decade, he went from ruling a small kingdom in northern Greece to becoming the overlord of pretty much everyone who mattered at that time. And unlike most empires, his didn't collapse immediately after he left. Well, okay, it kinda did, but let's not ruin the moment. But there's another aspect to Alexander's conquest, and that's how he united the East and the West into one big happy empire. Of course, happy might be a bit of a stretch when you're forcing 2 completely different cultures to share a living space. It's like moving your Greek neighbors and your Persian in-laws into the same house and expecting them to get along. But to Alexander's credit, he tried. He married a Bactrian princess and encouraged his men to marry local women, founded cities as cultural melting pots, and even adopted Persian customs himself. I would assume somewhere in the afterlife, Darius III is probably like, really, now you want to embrace our culture? But what is really fascinating about Alexander and what sets him apart isn't just his conquest or his cultural shenanigans. Even before his ascension to the throne, he was destined for greatness. If you wonder why, then I have to introduce Olympias. Now, we all know moms love to hype their kids, but Olympias took it to the next level. She claimed Alexander was the son of Zeus himself. Now that's something to flex. Regardless of it being the perfect branding for a 20-year-old king who wants to conquer the known world, it's hard to compete with a man who believes he is ordained by the heavens. But that's not all. When most kids get a middle school teacher who assigns way too much homework, Alexander got Aristotle. That's right, the same guy who basically invented the scientific method and shaped Western philosophy was his personal mentor. Aristotle taught him about science, philosophy, and probably a few tips on how to smack down anyone who doubted him. It's like having Elon Musk teach you physics. Now it becomes clear why Alexander was so successful. With Zeus as his stepdad and Aristotle as his mentor, it's no wonder he turned out the way he did. Great. But now that we talked enough about Alexander's youth, it's time to talk about how the greatest conqueror of all time left this world. Because of course, even Alexander wasn't immortal, despite what his mom claimed. The guy who crushed empires didn't go out in a blaze of glory on the battlefield. Oh no, that would be too fitting. Instead, his death remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. This is how it goes. It's 323 BC and Alexander is in Babylon, fresh off plans to conquer literally the rest of the world. Then out of nowhere he falls ill after a banquet, and within days, the unstoppable force of history is stopped by a fever. Yep, the man who dodged Persian arrows was taken down by what was probably bad water, malaria, or maybe even typhoid. Or as some people suggest, poison. And what about his body? Oh, that's another rabbit hole. His corpse was allegedly stolen while en route to Macedon, and ended up in Egypt. Some say it was housed in Alexandria, because of course, where else would Alexander rest? Others claim it has been stolen to history. But I like to think he's out there somewhere, facepalming at how quickly his generals turned his life's work into a giant game of risk. So basically, after Alexander's death, his empire fractured into multiple Greek kingdoms, but his influence endured. Greek culture, language, arts, and philosophy spread across the lands he conquered, creating what historians call the Hellenistic Age. Thanks to Alexander's obsession with naming cities after himself, you would find cities named Alexandria that became centers of Greek art, science, and philosophy. I'm not gonna lie, but naming cities after yourself more than 20 times was kinda the ancient equivalent of replying to your own tweet to keep the conversation going. Like, we get it, Alex, you are great, but did the 21st Alexandria really need to happen? But jokes aside, he's the kind of guy who makes the other conquerors feel like underachievers. Conquering 2 million square miles by 32? Come on. But that's the thing about Alexander. He wasn't just a man, he was a legend. And maybe that's why he remains so fascinating. Love him or hate him, you can't ignore him. He's the gold standard of ambition, the template for greatness that every conqueror after him wanted to emulate but couldn't quite match. From Julius Caesar to Napoleon, countless leaders looked to him as the greatest in history. Caesar famously wept when he saw a statue of Alexander, lamenting that he'd done so little by comparison, and Napoleon studied his campaigns like a fanboy binge-watching a Netflix series. Because, let's face it, there's only one Alexander the Great, and he's still out there somewhere in the midst of history, daring us to do better. And perhaps that's the ultimate lesson. Alexander's greatness wasn't just about what he did, but how he thought. So whether you are Team Caesar, Team Napoleon, or just Team Please Don't Conquer Me, we can all agree on one thing. Alexander was the conqueror everyone wanted to be, but couldn't. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed diving into Alexander's legendary story, check out this video. Until the next time.